Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's story, Carnivorine by Lucy Hooper. When I, Ellis Graham, being a man of middle age, means, and leisure, determined upon starting last autumn for Rome with a view to studying up the localities for my projected history of the Sensi family, I never expected, assuredly, that a momentous and important task regarding other people's affairs and not my own should be imposed upon me. Yet I could not well refuse the mission. I had known the Lambert family for many years and had always cherished a warm friendship for Mr. and Mrs. Lambert, a friendship which, after the demise of the former, I had continued to his widow. And Julius, the elder son, had been quite a favourite of mine in his boyish days, though I could not altogether sympathise with his craze for scientific pursuits, and especially for botany. It must be confessed, however, that his researches into the formation and functions of the vegetable kingdom had led to some curious discoveries. But these discoveries had only served to arouse in his mind, as he grew to manhood, a wild ambition for further successes in the same line. I never exactly comprehended what course his investigations had taken, but I knew he was deeply interested in the Darwinian theories, and had set himself, in that connection, some inscrutable problem that he was trying to make out. He'd lived such a secluded life, shut up with his plants and his theories, that I'd wholly lost sight of him for some years, though my visits to Mrs. Lambert were still continued. I was a good deal surprised, however, on the eve of my departure for Europe, to receive from my old friend a few hurried lines begging that I would call to see her before I left, and fixing the very next evening for my visit. I responded to the appeal and found the usually serene and dignified lady in a state of unwonted emotion. "I've sent for you, dear Mr. Graham," she said, "to ask if you will undertake for me a very important mission. It's hardly right, I know, for me to make such a request of you, involving, as your consent will surely do, a good deal of trouble and the loss of a considerable portion of your time, but my peace of mind is at stake, and I do not know what else to do if you are not willing to help me." "Oh, anything that is in my power to execute, dear Mrs. Lambert, I will gladly undertake," I answered. And indeed, I was so much moved by her distress and by noticing the traces left upon her still fair features by wearing anxiety, that I was ready to promise anything or to undertake anything in her behalf. "I want you to find Julius for me." "Julius? Is he absent from home? I did not even know he'd gone away." "Yes. He sailed for Europe 3 years ago. You know, his uncle left him a handsome fortune a little before that time, and he went abroad to pursue, as he stated, his scientific experiments. I know that he believed himself to be on the verge of a great discovery, but of what nature that discovery was, he never would reveal, even to me. And as you may remember, I've never sympathized with him in his studies, so I suppose he did not consider me worthy of his confidence. Perhaps I did wrong. Maybe if I had interested myself more in his pursuits, he would not have left me as he has done. He told me before he went away that his experiments must be perfected in thorough seclusion, and that he never meant to relinquish them till he had arrived at some great result. We heard from him afterward at Paris, and later on at Milan, but he's not written to his brothers or to me for months." "Have you no idea as to his whereabouts at present?" "I have reason to think that he's taken up his abode somewhere in the neighbourhood of Rome. He was seen there 2 winters ago by Alan Spencer, the artist, who had quite a talk with him, but who could find out nothing from him respecting his residence or his pursuits." "Did he seem well?" "He looked tired and haggard," Mr. Spencer said, "but was otherwise well. The reason for my anxiety is, well, I may as well confess. I may as well confess it to you at once. I fear that there is some entanglement in the case, a passion for some woman who may entrap Julius into matrimony." "And have you any foundation for this dread?" "Only this. He let fall something to Mr. Spencer about a personage called Carnivorine." "What an extraordinary name! Did he give his friend any information concerning her?" "No, he was singularly reticent on the subject, and seemed really distressed at having let even her name slip out unawares. He requested Mr. Spencer never to mention it, but Alan has always been on very intimate terms with Richard and Maud, and seeing how uneasy we were at Julius's long silence, he did not hesitate, not having made any promise of secrecy, to tell us the little that he knew. So when you reach Rome, if you will try to find our lost Julius for us, I shall be more indebted to you than I can well tell you." I promised to do my best. And Mrs. Lambert, I promised to do my best, and Mrs. Lambert, visibly relieved, added some details about her son's banker in Rome, and also respecting the few persons that he knew in that city, and who might have learnt something concerning him during the last few months. Also, she gave me the name and address of the herbalist before whose door, and indeed issuing from it, Alan Spencer had met Julius in such an unexpected fashion. "You'll write to me as soon as you have any news," she said wistfully to me at parting. "And above all, let me know everything you can find out about Carnivorine. Do not hesitate to tell me the worst, even if Julius has married this creature with her singular name." I must confess that when I first arrived in Rome, so many personal interests claimed me that I did not at once begin my search for Julius Lambert, as I had intended to do. There were so many of my old friends and old haunts to revisit, and such numbers of new and interesting statues in the studio of the Roman sculptors, both native and foreign, to go to see, and my negotiation with the artists who were to execute the illustrations for my History of the Sensi family took up so much time that the weeks insensibly slipped away before I had taken any steps in the matter. I had had the time to receive more than one letter from Mrs. Lambert on the subject before I commenced my investigations. I must acknowledge that I had come to the conclusion that the mystery on investigation would prove to be no mystery at all, and Julius would be discovered in one of the minor hotels in Rome, too busy, or perhaps too much in love, to write. But when I did finally set out in search of him, I found myself baffled at the very outset by an impenetrable wall of mystery. Nobody had seen him, nobody knew anything about him. He'd drawn all his funds from the bankers on his first arrival in the city. He'd been in Rome some 2 years before and had bought a collection of the curious insect-eating plants of South America from the old herbalist, at whose door Alan Spencer had met him. That was all. If the earth had opened up beneath his feet and had swallowed him up, he could not have vanished more utterly from human ken. I sought for him in every direction. I employed the services of a private detective. I offered a reward for any news of him. All was of no use. I succeeded in learning that he had not left Rome, and that was all I could find out. Some months had elapsed, and I had pretty much abandoned the search in despair when one day the fancy took me to go on a ride on horseback over the Campagna. I had long cherished a desire to explore the less frequented and scarcely known districts of that vast region haunted by malaria and tenanted only by a few fever-stricken shepherds that lies outside the beaten track of tourists and travellers beyond the city walls. As may be imagined, I found my excursion rather dreary. I rode on and on, passing now a flock of sheep watched over by a brigand-looking guardian and a fierce rough dog that looked ready at a word or a sign from his master to tear down my horse and throttle its rider. And then some huge arch of a ruined aqueduct that in the days of classic Rome had been musical with laughing water. Sometimes I came upon the shattered fragments of an abandoned hovel or met with a herd of the grey-coated, long-horned oxen of the region, beautiful, placid-looking creatures that gazed at me inquiringly out of their large, soft eyes as I rode by, as though saying, "What is this stranger doing in this home of solitude and ruin?" Still, I was interested by the very novelty of the dreary region, and I rode on and on till the sun began to sink toward the western horizon. I've always considered myself fever-proof, but all the same, a ride after sunset over the Campagna is not the healthiest experiment in the world. So I wheeled my horse round and started to return to the city. And as I did so, I became aware of the existence of a house at a very short distance. I might very well have passed it without noticing it, as it was so embowered in a tussle of vegetation, vines, and bushes, as well as trees, that its shape and architecture were barely discernible. As I rode nearer, I saw that it was a modern villa of imposing dimensions which had been suffered to fall into almost total ruin. Whether the freak of a speculator or the wild idea of some Campagna proprietor had caused the erection in this lonely, unhealthy place of a costly country residence, there was no evidence to reveal. The grounds, once spacious and well laid out, were overrun with a thick undergrowth of plants and grasses. Here and there, a statue in white marble, streaked with damp and green with mould, showed under the shadow of the trees. In one, a graceful figure of a nymph, overthrown from its pedestal, lay prostrate among the rank grass. The facade of the house itself was adorned with the moss-grown sculptures, and one of the pillars supporting the doorway had been broken away, and its place was supplied by the trunk of a cypress. One half of the building showed deserted and ruinous, with its broken windows and decaying roof, but there were traces elsewhere of human habitation. The roof of the right wing had been mended, the windows were in good condition, and a gleam of firelight from the lower rooms gave a cheery aspect to that part of the edifice. And oddly enough, in spite of the universal decay and dilapidation, there were traces not only of comfort but of luxury in one portion of the premises, which I noticed as I drew near. This was a large conservatory adjoining the inhabited portion of the house. It was in perfect order. Not a pane was missing in its glazed walls, though through which I could discern the red glare of the stove fires within. as well as the dull green of the foliage of the plants. Both I and my horse were weary, so I decided that I would halt for an hour or so at this singular habitation and try for a feed of oats for my horse, as well as for a flask of Chianti and a crust of bread for myself. I drew rein at the dilapidated doorway, and just as I was about to announce my presence by a resounding knock from the butt end of my riding whip, the door was suddenly opened and a man came hurriedly forth. He started when he saw me and was about to retreat into the house, but by the red light of the waning sunset, I discerned his features and recognized him instantly. It was the man I had so long sought for, and in vain. It was Julius Lambert. Julius, I cried as he was about to vanish through the doorway. Julius Lambert, is it thus that you treat an old friend who has come so far to visit you? He turned back at the sound of my voice. So it is really you, Mr. Graham, he said hesitatingly. How in the world did you ever find me? Or the Villa Anzieri? Nobody has come near it, or me either, for over 2 years past. But come in. My man shall take charge of your horse, and you can tell me something about home matters. I willingly relinquished the charge of my wearied steed to the black-eyed, bronze-complexioned, picturesque-looking young fellow who came in answer to his master's call, and I followed Julius into the house. I could hardly believe my senses, or that I had found my missing friend at last. It had all happened so simply, and yet so strangely. Meanwhile, Julius, after he had gotten over the first shock of my intrusion, seemed really glad to see me. He piled fresh wood on the fire and gave orders that dinner should be served as soon as possible, and plied me with questions respecting his mother and his brother and sisters. As for himself, I found him looking far from well. He was never very stout, but he had grown lean and emaciated, and the yellowish pallor of his face gave evidence of the effects that the malaria of the Campagna had on his system. Dinner was served at last, a very palatable stew, flavoured with red peppers and tomatoes, with the accompaniment of some fine oranges and grapes by way of dessert, and a flask or two of Chianti wine and one of the delicate Civita Lavinia. Throughout the repast, I noticed with pain that Julius talked in a feverish, incoherent way, pressing me to eat or to drink, and hurrying questions and remarks about home matters, half the time without waiting for an answer. At last, pushing my plate aside, I remarked, Now, Julius, I've told you everything that you wish to know. It is my turn now to ask for a little information. What have you been doing all this long time in this solitude? He moved uneasily in his chair, and his wondering glance avoided mine. Nothing, he muttered. I am doing nothing. Nonsense, you cannot persuade me of the truth of that assertion. So ardent an experimentalist as you have always been, and so interested in the cause of science. Confess now, have you not made, or are you not on the verge of perfecting some great discovery? I touched the right chord. His eyes flashed and his whole countenance grew bright with animation. Yes, he cried, I have succeeded at last in my researches. For years I have tried to perfect a demonstration of the link between the vegetable and the animal kingdom. If you have come to scoff at my discoveries, go at once. Otherwise, follow me. Be prepared for full conviction as to the truth of what I have said. He rose as he spoke, and taking me by the hand, he led me to a door at the extremity of the large room in which we had dined. This door he unlocked with a key which he took from his pocket. Night had closed in, and he completed his preparations by lighting a great torch of pine branches. Wait on the threshold as you value your life, he said to me impressively. Then he threw open the door. It was the entrance to the conservatory. The first thing that struck me was a sort of faint rustling sound like that of a trailing garment or a sweeping bird's wing. Then, by the light of the torch which Julius held on high, I discerned in the centre of the room a vast tub filled with masses of spongy moss, from which rose a strange plant, a hideous, shapeless monster, a sort of vegetable hydra, or rather octopus, gigantic in size and repulsive in aspect and in colouring. So immense were its proportions that it filled by itself the whole place of the conservatory. It consisted of a central bladder-shaped trunk or core from which sprang countless branches, or rather arms, thick, leafless, of a livid green and streaked with blotches of a dull crimson. Each arm terminated in an oval protuberance which had a resemblance to the human eye. Julius took from a basket that stood near the door a great slice of raw meat, and fastening it to the end of a stick, he advanced it, taking infinite precautions to keep well out of reach within the circle of outstretched branches. Then I saw these great tentacle-like arms fold around their prey, which they transmitted to the central core, and then, closing around it, I saw no more. It was this slow motion of the branches that had caused the rustling sound which had amazed me on my first entrance. So repulsive was the aspect of this enormous creature, half plant and half animal, that I was glad to retreat to the dining room. Julius followed, flushed and elated at the healthful aspect of this monstrous creation. The plant you have seen, he said, is a Drosera, which by hint of careful selection and persevering attention, I have developed into this unheard of size. I have studied the discoveries of Darwin concerning these strange plants, the Drosera and the Dionea, which, though still vegetables, feed on the insects that they kill. It has been my desire for years to perfect the missing link, to develop the animal side of these curious vegetable natures. It has always been my theory that the hydra, the dragon, and other monstrous forms of animal life really did exist, and that in the evolution of ages, and by reason of geological changes on the surface of the earth, these creatures, deprived of their accustomed forms of nourishment, degenerated into trees and plants and took root in the earth. Some of them still preserve their primitive forms, as witness the dragon tree of Java. It has been my aim and endeavour to resuscitate the animal and the plant. Chance threw in my way a Drosera of great size. I have fed it on animal food for years and developed it into something that is not yet a dragon or a hydra, but which is surely something more than a plant. Had you ventured within reach of its branches, the grasp of a boa would not have been more swift or more deadly. And what further do you propose doing with your dreadful plant? My aim is to give it locomotion, to see it detach itself from the soil and go forth in search of prey. How can you contemplate the possibility of letting loose a monster on the world? For science, there is no such thing as a monster. Moreover, are there not crocodiles and anacondas and tigers upon earth, to say nothing of the shark and the octopus? Beside these, my creation, my Carnivorine, is a harmless creature. I started as I heard the name. So this, then, was the object of my poor friend's affections, this ghastly shape, not yet wholly animal, yet scarcely vegetable, with the form of a plant and the appetite of a beast of prey. Just then, Pietro, the manservant, came in to announce that my horse was at the door. It was a beautiful moonlight night, promising a pleasant ride to the city. I took my leave of Julius, therefore, with something of the feeling of relief of a man who awakes from sleep after having been oppressed by a terrible nightmare. But I did not depart without leaving my address, and I begged Julian to let me know if his strange discovery took any new developments in the near future. Weeks passed away, and I had nearly forgotten all about Julius and Carnivorine when one day I received a letter from him, written in a strain of great exultation and excitement. Come to me, dear friend, he wrote. Come at once. The hour of the perfecting of my experiment is at hand. Already amid the masses that surround Carnivorine, I discern the stirring and striving of the roots that are acquiring powers of independent locomotion. In a few days, the problem will be solved. I want you to be present as a witness of the phenomenon. My ambition is satisfied at last. My name shall be inscribed on the list of the great discoverers of the world of science. Come to me. Be at my side in the moment of my triumph. It was not without difficulty that I once more made my way to the Villa Anzieri. It was late in the afternoon when I drew rein at the dilapidated doorway that I remembered so well. I knocked loudly at the door, but there was no response to my call. Looking around, I saw that the whole place wore an inexplicable air of desertion. No firelight was visible at the windows, and the red glare of the stove fire no longer shone behind the dim panes of the hothouse. Finally, in vague alarm, finding that my shouts and knocking produced no response, I tied my horse to one of the doorposts, and singling out a window of the large room in which we had dined on the occasion of my former visit, I swung myself up to it by the help of a thick stem of ivy and peered into the room. The sight that I beheld within froze my soul with horror. At the end of the room, near the entrance to the conservatory, rose the hideous form of Carnivorine, no longer planted in a tub, but supported on what seemed to me a pair of paddle-like feet or paws, like those of some misshapen antediluvian animal. The powerful branches, or rather tentacles, were upraised and closely folded around some central object. And at the summit of these livid, green, closely pressed, serpent-like stems appeared a ghastly object. It was a livid human head, the head of a corpse, and the pallid features were those of Julius Lambert. With one strike of my arm, I burst upon the casement. I sprang into the room and hastened toward the dreadful object. The long arms quivered, began to unfold themselves, but before the creature could put itself in motion, a shot from the revolver that I always carried during my companion wanderings, pierced its central core. The tentacles fell apart, and the hideous plant sank prone upon the ground, bearing with it in its fall the crushed and lifeless form of Julius Lambert. A stream of reddish sap that looked like blood flowed from the shattered stem and mingled with the branches, stained as they were with a ruddier crimson, the lifeblood of my unhappy friend. I never discovered how or when the catastrophe took place. From the condition of the body, death must have taken place at least 24 hours before my arrival. The servants, brought face to face with such a shocking and to them inexplicable catastrophe, had fled from the house, taking with them whatever money or valuables they could lay their hands upon. I tried to trace them out, but in vain. As to the rest, it was all mere conjecture on my part. The uptorn earth and mosses in the tub in which Carnivorine had originally found an abode seemed to prove that a sudden development of the long sought-for powers of locomotion in the creature had unexpectedly taken place, and that Julius had been seized, either in the act of expecting its condition or at the moment of offering it food. At all events, the vegetable animal, or animal vegetable, had made a solitary trial of its newly formed powers, and had found a solitary prey when the bullet from my pistol put an end to its existence. Among the papers left behind by Julius was a series of memoranda respecting the experiments he had tried and the processes he had used to bring his dreadful creation to full perfection. These I destroyed without hesitation. It would not have been well to have suffered the race of the vegetable octopus to be extended and propagated by curious scientists in the future. Then, lest a new growth should spring from the stem or branches of the accursed tree, I hewed them to pieces with my own hand and burned the fragments to ashes. The annihilation of my friend's discovery may be a loss to science, but humanity will only have cause to rejoice in the total destruction of Carnivorine. End of story. I hope that you enjoyed.